In the sweltering heat of August 1590, John White, governor of the city of Raleigh in Virginia, stood on the shores of Roanoke Island, his heart hammering not with the joy of return, but with a cold, hollowed dread. 3 long years had passed since he left his daughter, his son-in-law, and his baby granddaughter, Virginia Dare, the first English child born in the New World, promising to return with supplies. 3 years of war with Spain, thwarted voyages, and ceaseless, agonizing worry. Now, silence. The palisade wall, meant to defend a vibrant, hopeful community of 117 souls, stood intact, but the settlement within was deserted. It was quiet, too quiet. No smoke, no sound of children's laughter, no sign of hasty retreat or bloody conflict. The homes White had helped build were dismantled, the heavier iron tools gone, suggesting a planned, orderly departure, not a panicked flight. The only trace of their existence was a single chilling word carved deeply into a post of the main entrance: CROATOAN. White remembered the prearranged sign, a cross carved above any message if they had been forced to leave under duress or attack. There was no cross. The message suggested they had gone to Croatoan Island, 50 miles south, the home of their trusted Native American ally, Manteo. Relief mixed with an ice pick of suspicion. He searched frantically, driven by the knowledge that tomorrow, August 18th, was Virginia's 3rd birthday. He prayed to find a birthday celebrated not in a ghost town, but on a friendly shore.
Then he found it, carved into the bark of a large tree nearby, were the letters C-R-O. The captain of his relief ship, a Spaniard-turned-Englishman named Simon Fernandez, refused to sail south. The weather was turning violent, a hurricane brewing on the horizon, and the anchor was lost. White, the governor, the grandfather, the man who had abandoned his family to the New World's mercy, was forced back to England, never to return. The 117 colonists, men, women, and children, had not simply left, they had vanished, leaving behind only 2 cryptic clues and a shadow that would hang over the North Carolina coast for 4 centuries. Who were these people? What unimaginable hardship had they faced? And what or who was the true meaning behind the word Croatoan? The answer lies not just in a single event, but in a deeper story of cultural clash, unforgiving nature, and a desperate struggle for survival at the edge of the known world. This is the story of the lost dreams, the buried secrets, and the enduring ghosts of Roanoke.
To understand the disappearance, one must first understand the ambition that drove 117 ordinary people across a deadly ocean. The year is 1584. England, under the reign of the formidable Elizabeth I, is a nation intoxicated by rivalry and discovery. Across the Atlantic, England's sworn enemy, Spain, had already plundered the gold of the Aztec and Inca empires, securing a wealth that threatened to finance a permanent Catholic conquest of Europe. England needed a foothold in the New World, not just for glory, but for survival. Enter Sir Walter Raleigh, a dashing courtier, poet, and favorite of the Queen. Raleigh, granted a royal patent by Elizabeth I to claim all non-Christian lands in the territory he grandly named Virginia, in honor of the Virgin Queen, was the driving force behind the Roanoke ventures. His objective was clear: establish a base to harass Spanish treasure fleets, search for the mythical Northwest Passage to Asia, and, critically, find the gold and silver rumored to be abundant in the new lands. The first expedition in 1584, led by Captains Philip Amadas and Arthur Barlow, was a reconnaissance mission. They landed on the outer banks of present-day North Carolina, finding the landscape and its people almost Edenic. Barlow's report, glowing with descriptions of native kindness and the soil the most plentiful, sweet, fruitful, and wholesome of all the world, was a masterpiece of propaganda. Crucially, they made contact with two Native Americans from the mainland, Montejo, who would become a steadfast ally, and Wanchese, whose initial curiosity would curdle into resentment. The captains returned to England with the two men, showcasing them as living proof of the New World's promise. The stage was set. Raleigh's second voyage, in 1585, was no gentle exploratory trip. It was a military occupation, a colonial project intended to be permanent, led by the stern, competent Governor Ralph Lane. Lane brought 107 men, mostly soldiers, artisans, and scientists, but no women or children. The true purpose was immediate resource extraction and defensive positioning. Among the settlers was Thomas Harriot, a brilliant scientist who learned the local Algonquian language from Montejo, and John White, an artist and surveyor. White, using his artistic skill, created invaluable watercolors documenting the landscape and the lives of the local people. The CROATOAN, the Dassamon-Capik, and the CROATOAN. His paintings are, to this day, the most detailed and human portrait of Native American life on the Carolina coast before European influence irrevocably changed it. The site chosen was Roanoke Island, a 10-mile-long, 2.5-mile-wide strip of land between the Outer Banks and the mainland. Lane's men quickly built Fort Raleigh and attempted to establish a working relationship with the local chief Wingina. But the English were not pioneers, they were occupiers. They brought with them not just iron tools and seeds, but deadly unseen forces. The first deaths in the New World were not from arrows, but from disease. English diseases, to which the Native Americans had no immunity, began to sweep through Wingina's villages with terrifying speed. Wingina watched his people die. He saw the English soldiers' unending hunger for food and their insatiable demand for exploration into his territories. The initial goodwill curdled. By the spring of 1586, the colony was on the brink of collapse. Relations with the surrounding tribes had deteriorated. The English had been living off the natives' winter stores, and those stores were now depleted. Lane, a soldier, chose escalation over diplomacy. Chief Wingina, now known to the English as Pemisapan, moved his capital inland and began discreetly forming a coalition of tribes to eliminate the invasive, disease-spreading English. Lane, paranoid and desperate, learned of the plot through Montejo. In a vicious preemptive strike, Lane and his men surrounded Wingina's village of Dassamon-Capik. They feigned friendship, then attacked. Wingina fled, but was tracked down and brutally beheaded. The blood of the chief did more than simply end a threat. It poisoned the land forever for the English. The Native American tribes around Roanoke, horrified by the treachery and bloodshed, abandoned all hope of peaceful coexistence. The colonists were now isolated, surrounded by a hostile, vengeful wilderness. Just as the crisis reached its peak, a massive English fleet, commanded by the famed privateer Sir Francis Drake, arrived by chance. Drake had just finished a successful campaign against Spanish settlements in the Caribbean. Seeing the desperate state of Lane's men, he offered them all passage home. Within days, the entire colony, abandoning its fort and its dream, sailed for England in June 1586. They left behind a burnt bridge of trust, a desecrated landscape, and a lingering question. Could any English settlement truly survive here now? They had, however, forgotten to tell Raleigh they were leaving. A supply ship sent by Sir Walter arrived 2 weeks later to find a deserted fort. To maintain England's claim on the land, the captain left 15 men, 15 unlucky souls, to hold the fort until the next expedition could arrive. Their fate, too, would become a terrible prelude to the greater vanishing.
This was not to be a military outpost, but a civil, permanent settlement, a true city of Raleigh. In 1587, 117 settlers embarked for the New World. They were a cross-section of English life, 17 women, 9 children, and 91 men, including farmers, carpenters, and merchants. This was a family venture. The governor was no soldier like Lane, but the trusted artist and mapmaker from the previous trip, John White. On board was White's daughter, Eleanor Dare, her husband, Ananias Dare, and their hopes for a new life. Also with them was Manteo, who had returned to England, embraced Christianity, and was sailing back to his home as an English lord, a designated Lord of Roanoke and Dassamonquepayok. Raleigh's express instructions were to settle not on the poisoned ground of Roanoke Island, but further north in the magnificent natural harbor of the Chesapeake Bay. They never made it. Their pilot and master mariner, the same Simon Fernandez, who would later refuse to help John White, was a man of immense skill and brutal self-interest. A Portuguese privateer who had defected to the English, Fernandez was a ruthless man, obsessed with treasure hunting. When the fleet arrived at Roanoke Island in July 1587 to check on the 15 men left behind, they found only human bones scattered across the old fort site, a clear message from the local tribes. Fernandez, claiming the sailing season was too late and supplies too low to continue further north to the Chesapeake Bay, forced White's hand. He refused to transport the settlers further, essentially stranding them on the site of the previous failed and blood-stained colony. The official order was mutinied by sheer willpower and greed. The 117 settlers, the families, the children, the hopefuls were dumped on Roanoke Island, a place already marked by death and Native American enmity. The true city of Raleigh would never be built. The colonists went to work. They repaired the fort, built new homes, and planted crops. They held on to the belief that if they were seen as a true, peaceful community, not a military camp, the surrounding tribes might yet be won over. John White attempted to bridge the divide, sending a message to the CROATOAN people. The answer was a shower of arrows that killed a man named George Howe while he was crabbing alone. The English retaliated with a brutal, clumsy strike on a group they believed to be their attackers. To their horror, they discovered they had attacked their allies, the CROATOAN people. Mistake
followed treachery, followed massacre. Yet a beacon of hope flickered. On August 18, 1587, Eleanor Dare gave birth to a daughter. They named her Virginia Dare. Her birth was a symbolic moment for the entire English colonial project, the first English baby born in the Americas, a living promise of a new future. Just 10 days later, the settlers, realizing they were short on vital supplies and now deeply isolated, pleaded with their governor, John White, to return to England for help. White, reluctant to leave his daughter and newborn granddaughter, was finally persuaded. He was the only one capable of securing the necessary aid and funds from Raleigh. He kissed his granddaughter goodbye, promising to return by spring. It was the last time any European would see the living faces of the lost colony.
John White returned to England in the fall of 1587, full of hope and a desperate sense of urgency. He arrived in a nation consumed by fear. Spain, led by King Philip II, was preparing the most colossal naval invasion in history, the Spanish Armada. Every available ship, sailor, and resource was commandeered for defense. The fate of 117 colonists on a distant island mattered less than the survival of England itself. White secured 2 small pinnaces and prepared to sail in the spring of 1588. But before he could leave, the Queen issued a crushing order. No English ship was permitted to sail away from the coast. White, frantic, was forced to use his ships as privateers, which were then attacked and stripped of their provisions by Spanish vessels. He barely limped back to port, the dream of an immediate rescue shattered. When the massive Spanish Armada finally sailed in 1588, England was saved by a combination of Drake's brilliant naval tactics and a brutal storm that shattered the Spanish fleet. The country erupted in triumph, but the war, though won, continued to consume all resources. White tried again and again to secure passage, but the New World was a secondary concern. For 2 full years, the 117 settlers of Roanoke waited, their stores dwindling, their hopes fading, while their governor battled bureaucracy and war fever thousands of miles away. Finally, in 1590, White managed to secure passage on a privateering expedition bound for the Caribbean. The ship captains, more interested in Spanish gold than lost English families, promised a quick detour to Roanoke. It was on August 18th, Virginia Dare's 3rd birthday, that John White, standing on the deck of his relief ship, finally glimpsed the shoreline of Roanoke Island for the first time in 3 years. He saw the palisade. He heard the silence. He found the booms of the 15 guards, and he saw the word carved on the post, the single enigmatic message, CROATOAN. White was certain the colonists had relocated to CROATOAN Island, modern-day Hatteras Island, where Monteo's people lived. He begged the captains to sail south. The captains, seeing the brewing hurricane and having already secured a small Spanish prize, refused. They sailed for home. The mystery was born, and with it the legend of the Lost Colony. But the true story, buried for over 400 years, involved far more than a simple carving and a failed rescue.
The single carved word, CROATOAN, remains the most important clue, but also the most misleading. John White interpreted it as a sign of peaceful relocation. Modern historians and archaeologists now understand that the settlers were likely driven to the Croatoan people not by choice, but by famine and existential necessity. The colony's struggle began long before 1587. Early reports from the 1585 military expedition noted the soil on Roanoke Island was poor for English-style farming, being mostly sandy and marshy. The settlers were always heavily dependent on Native American provisions, a reliance that led to the execution of Chief Wingana. When the 117 settlers arrived in 1587, they brought insufficient supplies, relying on an immediate return trip by John White that was tragically delayed for 3 years. Compounding their logistical nightmare was a disastrous environmental crisis. In 1998, scientists at the University of Arkansas and the College of William and Mary conducted dendrochronological studies, examining tree rings on ancient cypress trees in the region. Their findings delivered a seismic shock to the Roanoke mystery. The tree ring data revealed that the years 1587, 1588, and 1589 marked the most severe drought in the entire 800-year history of the Outer Banks. It was not just a dry spell, it was an unparalleled ecological catastrophe. Imagine Eleanor Dare looking out over the wilting corn, the parched bean rows, and the stagnant salty water. The same drought that decimated the English crops would have simultaneously devastated the Native American food supply, the wild game, the fish populations, and the corn they had grown. This drought removed the possibility of either side sustaining the other. The land itself became an active agent of destruction. The settlers had two terrible options: starve on Roanoke Island or integrate with a Native American tribe willing to take them in. The tribe most likely to offer refuge was the Croatoan people, led by Chief Manteo, who maintained the only fragile, enduring alliance with the English. The colonists had likely exhausted their remaining supplies, and in the winter of 1588 or 1589, walked the 50 miles south to Croatoan Island, Hatteras Island, in a desperate plea for survival. The iron tools missing from the settlement suggest they took their most valuable assets that could be traded for food, shelter, and protection with their allies. The lack of a carved cross suggests the relocation was consensual, born of desperation, but not forced by attack. The 117 English souls, broken by war and starvation, may have traded their English identity for survival, becoming adoptive members of the Croatoan nation. This integration theory, supported by the strongest circumstantial evidence, leads to a heart-wrenching yet plausible fate. The English settlers became Native Americans. Governor White's failure to check Croatoan Island was the final, fatal turn of the screw. Had he sailed south, he might have found his daughter and granddaughter living in the Croatoan village, perhaps in rougher conditions, but alive. He might have even found children with light eyes and red hair, growing up speaking Algonquin. But the story doesn't end with a simple merger. The assimilated colonists would have faced unimaginable cultural and religious pressures. They would have been expected to farm, hunt, and live according to Croatoan customs. Their clothes, language, and very memory of England would have faded into the mists of the Outer Banks. For centuries, local folklore on Hatteras Island claimed that some of the locals were descendant from the lost colonists. In the early 2000s, archaeologists began systematic digs. They found Native American pottery mixed with broken 16th century English ceramics, tools, and a gold ring likely belonging to a member of the Dare or White families. The strongest evidence came from a deep pit in the Croatoan village site. Digging through layers of Native American refuse, archaeologists unearthed a small iron clasp, the kind of clasp used for a book cover. It was a European item found deep within an indisputably Native American context, suggesting long-term coexistence and the exchange of cherished but eventually discarded items.
The settlers didn't vanish. They were absorbed. The bloodline, however, remained tenuous. Intertribal warfare was a constant threat, and the integrated colonists, still ethnically distinct, may have become targets during conflicts with the mainland tribes. This leads to the next darkest theory, the one that provides the closure of violence. There is compelling evidence that at least a portion of the colonists, perhaps a group distinct from the one that went to Croatoan, may have attempted to follow Raleigh's original instructions and relocate further north to the Chesapeake Bay. This theory is rooted in the narrative of the other great colonial success story, Jamestown. When the Jamestown settlers arrived in 1607, they were greeted by the mighty Powhatan Confederacy, led by the powerful chief Wahunsinak, better known simply as Powhatan, the father of Pocahontas. Powhatan told the Jamestown settlers a chilling story. He claimed to have sent a war party to a settlement near the mouth of the Chesapeake, a settlement of English people, and personally ordered them all killed. Captain John Smith, the famous leader of Jamestown, wrote of this account. Powhatan reportedly showed Smith a pile of iron tools, suggesting they were spoils taken from the massacre. Powhatan claimed the English had moved into a region he considered sacred and threatened his authority, so he destroyed them. Historians debate whether Powhatan's victims were the main body of the Roanoke colonists or the small group of 15 men left behind in 1586, but some evidence points to a larger, later group. Map evidence, the Darestone Map. A recently analyzed map made by John White, known as the La Virginia Pars Map, has two tiny patches on it. One, near present-day Plymouth, North Carolina, covers an Old English fort symbol. The other, near the Chowan River, covers a drawing of a fortress. This suggests White later received intelligence that the colonists had relocated twice, first to a nearby inland location, and perhaps a second group moving north. Oral tradition. Local Native American traditions collected in the 16th century suggested that the colonists had moved up the Chowan and Roanoke rivers. If some colonists moved inland and then north toward the Chesapeake, they would have walked straight into Powhatan's territory. Powhatan would have seen them not as neighbors, but as invaders, a direct threat to his nascent empire. The English may have survived the drought, only to be annihilated by the most powerful chief in the region. The most accepted view today is that the colony did not suffer a single monolithic fate, but experienced a bifurcation. A large group, perhaps the most desperate families, went south to CROATOAN Island, trading their labor and their metal tools for protection. They intermarried and assimilated, their lineage slowly blending into the ancestors of the modern-day Lundy and Croatoan Islanders. A smaller, perhaps more ambitious or religiously conservative group may have tried to follow the original plan, moving inland and north toward the Chowan River or the Chesapeake, where they ultimately met the brutal end orchestrated by Powhatan. Imagine Virginia Dare, the iconic symbol of English America, at the age of 3 or 4, no longer speaking English, but the soft coastal Algonquin of the Croatoan people. She would have grown up with a bow and arrow, not a Bible, her blonde hair and light eyes marking her as a curiosity, but her customs and loyalties rooted in the sandy soil of Hatteras. This is the hidden triumph of Roanoke, a successful survival, but at the cost of the English dream. They didn't fail to establish a colony, they established a blended society. The ultimate irony is that when the next successful English colony, Jamestown, began its struggle, it too relied on Native American aid, thanks to Pocahontas and others, to survive its starving time, a lesson learned too late and paid for by the lives of the 117 souls who truly vanished overnight.
The relocation was a slow, painful march, not a celebratory voyage. It was not the entire colony, perhaps 70 or 80 souls, led by Eleanor and Ananias Dare and the steadfast Manteo. They reached the northern shores of CROATOAN Island, now Hatteras, exhausted, starved, and stripped of their English pride. The word CROATOAN was the promise of a meal and a roof. The alternative was death on the Roanoke sands. Manteo, now serving as the bridge between two broken cultures, presented the English to his people, the Hatteras, as they were later called. He argued that the English settlers, broken by the drought, were no longer a threat, but a resource. Their iron tools, their knowledge of carpentry, and their skills in hunting with firearms, though the powder reserves were low, were valuable assets. The CROATOAN accepted them, not as equals, but as dependents. Eleanor Dare, the daughter of Governor White and the mother of Virginia, became the quiet center of the remaining English. She held on to a precious faded wooden Bible and a single silver cross, the last anchors to her past. Her husband, Ananias, a skilled cooper, spent his days fixing CROATOAN water barrels and shaping new tools from the valuable English iron. For Virginia Dare, the New World was the only world she knew. By the time she was 3, the language of the CROATOAN elders, Algonquian, had replaced the English lullabies she heard from her mother. Her English name was quickly replaced by an Algonquian moniker, perhaps something like Sakawut, meaning the little white flower, a quiet recognition of her unique heritage. She learned to navigate the thickets, to identify edible roots, and to track the abundant waterfowl of the Outer Banks. She was raised not by Puritan strictures, but by the deep, cyclical wisdom of the Native American grandmothers. Virginia's light hair and striking blue eyes marked her as the outsider, a perpetual symbol of the strange, pale people who had arrived from the sea. But her heart and her hands belonged to the sands of CROATOAN. The settlers' lives were not idyllic. They faced brutal demands from their hosts. To earn their keep, the men were sent on hunting parties into dangerous mainland territories. The women were integrated into the communal work of farming and processing game. The most difficult price was assimilation. It wasn't merely a change of clothing, but a fundamental shift in faith. The English clung to their Christianity, but the spiritual life of the CROATOAN, the reverence for the Manitou, the spirit world, and the importance of the Weirdoans, chiefs, as spiritual leaders, slowly began to permeate their lives. Children, like Virginia, did not face this conflict. They were raised in the new tradition. But for Eleanor, watching her daughter participate in ceremonies she considered heathen must have been a daily crushing grief. She had carried Virginia across the Atlantic to secure her future in a Christian city. Instead, she was raising her in an Algonquian village. Over the next decade, the last tangible signs of English identity began to fade. The heavy, formal English clothes wore out and were replaced by deer hides. The English language was reserved for the elders, spoken only in whispered, sorrowful conversations by the campfire. Archaeological finds suggest the slow-fed. A pocket knife, snapped in half and discarded. A brass thimble, meticulously preserved because of its function. And the iron tools, highly prized, were broken down, reforged, and often used to tip Native American arrows, transforming English technology into Algonquian weaponry. The colonists were not just gone, they were metamorphosed. While the CROATOAN group struggled to survive and assimilate, the possibility remains that the smaller group that moved inland towards the Chowan River met a swifter, more violent end. Let us follow the imagined path of Thomas Smith, a young settler who, according to John White's maps, may have been part of the inland group. This group, refusing assimilation, believed their salvation lay in finding a better, more defensible spot to build the true city of Raleigh. They pushed inland, using the vast network of rivers as their guide,
eventually finding a defensible spot near the Chowanek tribe. Unlike the friendly Croatoan, the Chowanek were often rivals of the English and held sway over a rich inland territory coveted by the great chief Powhatan. This group may have survived for years, sustained by their determination, but their small numbers and isolation made them vulnerable. Their presence would have been viewed by Powhatan as an unacceptable encroachment. 17 years later, when the English finally established the colony at Jamestown, the first word they heard about the lost white people came from Powhatan. Captain John Smith's account, chilling in its detail, described the massacre. Powhatan's warriors reportedly descended upon the isolated settlement at night. The attack was swift and total. The settlers, already weakened, were overwhelmed. Powhatan ordered the English men, women, and children killed, with only a few maidens and boys spared and taken as servants or assimilated into distant tribes. The survivors of this massacre, according to Smith's intelligence, were taken to a village called Okanahoen on the south bank of the Roanoke River, and were eventually absorbed into a small, allied tribe called the Chawanoic. This is the grim duality of the Lost Colony. One, the assimilated, Croatoan group. They survived physically, but sacrificed their English identity. The irony is profound. The English who tried to become Americans survived. The English who tried to remain English died. The mystery, far from being solved, has led to a lasting cultural legacy. The Lumbee tribe of North Carolina, the largest Native American tribe east of the Mississippi, has long held an oral tradition that they are descendants of the lost colonists of Roanoke and the allied Native Americans. Centuries of intermarriage created a blended people. Documents from the 18th and 19th centuries reference groups of Native Americans in inland North Carolina with surnames common to the Roanoke settlers, such as Dare, Dial, and Taylor. They also possessed unique cultural traits, including speaking a dialect that used numerous archaic English words.
While the definitive genetic link remains hotly debated, the cultural story is undeniable. The lost colonists did not simply vanish, they became the seeds of a new people, their identities subsumed by the vast, unforgiving, yet ultimately protective American wilderness. The Lost Colony of Roanoke is not a story of failure, but a story of blending. The first accidental and tragic example of what would happen when English ambition met the unbreakable power of the New World.
The quest for the lost colony did not wait 4 centuries. It began almost immediately. When the English established Jamestown in 1607, the settlers were under direct orders from King James I and the Virginia Company to find the Roanoke colonists. They desperately needed the knowledge and the manpower the survivors might possess. Captain John Smith, whose life was famously saved by Pocahontas, was the most determined early investigator. As previously noted, he interrogated Chief Powhatan and received the chilling confession of the massacre near the Chesapeake. Smith followed up on this intelligence, sending several expeditions inland. The expeditions brought back tantalizing, though fragmented, evidence. Reports of people in the interior, specifically near the Chowan River and the Roanoke River, who lived in Native American style but had brick houses and practiced some Christian rites. Sightings of blue-eyed or fair-haired children among the Native American tribes. Powhatan's own claims, backed by a meager collection of English tools and gun parts, suggesting a violent end for some settlers. However, the Jamestown colony was perpetually on the brink of collapse, consumed by its own starving time and constant conflict with the Powhatan. They could not dedicate the resources for a full-scale rescue or confirmation mission. The focus shifted from finding the lost colony to simply surviving their own. By the 1920s, the hope of finding a functioning English settlement was abandoned, replaced by the grim reality that the Roanoke survivors were either dead or had become completely unrecognizable, absorbed into the vast unknown wilderness. The 20th century saw the most spectacular and eventually discredited attempt to solve the mystery, the Dare Stones. This saga became a powerful lesson in how deeply Americans craved a simple, tragic answer to the Roanoke puzzle. In 1937, a tourist named Lewis Hammond claimed to have found a carved stone near the Chowan River. The carving, written in archaic English, purported to be a message from Eleanor Dare. It described the massacre of the colonists by Native Americans in 1591, detailed the death of Ananias Dare, and ended with the words, "Virginia weeps, Virginia Dare weeps."
This initial stone was followed by dozens of others found across the southeastern U.S. These stones seem to confirm Powhatan's story, providing a direct personal account from Virginia Dare's mother. The stones immediately became a national sensation, offering closure and cementing the tragic narrative.
This initial stone, now known as Dare Stone 1, was briefly considered authentic by some historians. However, as more stones appeared, many with glaring linguistic and historical inconsistencies, skepticism mounted. Eventually, the stones were definitively exposed as a hoax. A journalist tracked the trail back to a stonecutter named William Eberhart, who admitted to carving the majority of the stones as part of a scheme orchestrated by Lewis Hammond. The Dare stones were proven to be a sensational fabrication, a desperate cultural response to a historical vacuum. The hoax deeply damaged the credibility of ongoing research and highlighted the danger of mixing wishful thinking with serious investigation. The true clues were not simple carvings, but subtle whispers in the soil. The most promising modern investigations have come from combining old maps with 21st century technology. In 2012, researchers from the First Colony Foundation and the British Museum made a stunning discovery on John White's original La Virginia Pars map, 1585 to 1586. White, the mapmaker and governor, had used a thick reddish patch to cover something on the map, likely to keep the information secret from the Spanish. Using advanced imaging technology and X-ray fluorescent spectrometry, the researchers peeked beneath the patch. They discovered two things. One patch was covering an old minor English fort symbol near the Outer Banks. The other, much more significant patch, located about 50 miles inland on the Chowan River, was covering a symbol for a large, four-pointed star, the cartographer's symbol for a fortress or a major settlement. This strongly suggests that White, before leaving for England in 1587, or perhaps upon his return in 1590, was privy to secret intelligence that the colonists planned to relocate inland to a new site, a place known to cartographers as Site X. This location aligns with the later reports received by John Smith in Jamestown. This discovery provides a powerful synthesis of the two main theories. The settlers may have attempted to move inland, Site X, and when that failed, the survivors moved south to CROATOAN. The search at Site X since 2012 have discovered evidence of intermarriage, have uncovered evidence of color-coded maps, have uncovered fragments of 16th century English pottery and copper materials in a Native American context, confirming that there was significant contact between the English and Native Americans at that inland location, right where the secret fortress symbol was hidden. The ongoing work is not searching for a perfectly preserved English village. It is searching for evidence of cultural exchange, a broken English ceramic next to a Native American cooking pot, a piece of forged iron mixed with a bone pile. The scientists are not looking for the English, they are looking for the blended Americans. The Lost Colony of Roanoke remains unsolved, but the investigation has shifted from a romantic mystery to a forensic, scientific quest. The ghosts of the 117 souls are being summoned not by folklore, but by X-rays, satellite imagery, and the relentless curiosity of a nation trying to understand its own complex, often tragic beginning.
The year is 1607. Sakawut, the woman the English once knew as Virginia Dare, is a woman of 20, living on CROATOAN Island. Her hair, though slightly lighter than her adopted people's, is woven with shells and otter fur. She speaks only Algonquian and is married to a Croatoan hunter. Her son, Mato, a name meaning white feather, shows the faint blue eyes of his English grandfather, John White, a feature that always draws the notice of the elders. Life is hard, but stable. She knows the English only as ghosts, stories told by her mother, Eleanor, who died years ago, her final English prayer whispered into the wind. The surviving Roanoke settlers had long since dispersed. Most had fully integrated into the Croatoan or Hatteras tribes. A few, including a small number of children, had been taken by mainland tribes, including those under Powhatan's distant influence, who viewed the English children as valuable bargaining chips or servants. Then, the rumors began. Strange, armed, hungry white men had landed far to the north, establishing a fort on a marshy peninsula near the Great River, Jamestown. To the Native American tribes, these were not rescuers. They were invaders who had returned. To Sakawut and the few remaining assimilated settlers, these were the people who had abandoned them, the second coming of the English disease and hunger. The definitive encounter, the end of the Roanoke story, did not happen on the Outer Banks, but inland where the two English worlds briefly intersected. In the summer of 1609, Captain John Smith of Jamestown, desperate for food and information, led a trading mission up the Roanoke River. His party reached a large Native American town called Okanahawan, the very place Powhatan had indicated was holding the Roanoke survivors decades earlier. There, Smith's interpreter, a young man named Henry Spellman, reported a stunning observation. He saw two children, a boy and a girl, with distinctive European features, living among the tribe. They were dressed and spoke as Native Americans, but they were clearly of English descent. Smith could not force a rescue. His party was small, and the atmosphere was tense. The Native Americans flatly denied having any connection to the lost white people, but the visual evidence was undeniable. Smith focused on Jamestown's immediate survival, recorded the sighting, but was unable to act. This sighting is believed by many historians to be the final, verifiable account of the Roanoke survivors. They were not all killed. They were simply lost to the English world, their descendants already blending into the indigenous population of the region. The true legacy of Roanoke, the one that makes it such an enduring and strange American story, is that it predates the official founding of the United States. It is the story of accidental creation. The Jamestown settlers came with a goal: English domination. The Roanoke settlers were the unwilling pioneers of multiculturalism. They did not choose to intermarry, they chose to survive through intermarriage. Virginia Dare's son, Mato, and children like him represented a new demographic, people whose heritage was equally rooted in the ancient soil of the American East Coast and the distant shores of England. These descendants grew up to be the ancestors of the Lumbee tribe, the Hatteras, Croatoan,
people, and other tribes across the Carolinas. By 1621, 4 decades after the first landing, the last of the original Roanoke settlers, the few who had clung to life, would have died. Saquawat, Virginia Dare, having lived a full Native American life, would have passed her memories and her lineage down to her children, the next generation. Her son Mato, half English and half Croatoan, would have possessed a unique perspective. 1. He knew the English language, though rarely used. 2. He knew the European tools and how to work iron. 3. He also knew the deepest secrets of the land, the hunting grounds, and the politics of the Algonquian tribes. He was the perfect, tragic bridge between two worlds. The colonists had not established a city of Raleigh, but they had established an unspoken legacy of blending that continues to define the multicultural reality of America today. They were the original Lost Americans, forever a shadow in the official history, but a living bloodline in the oral tradition of the Southeast. The colony did not vanish overnight. The settlers survived the Great Drought, but they were consumed by the Native American world, becoming an inseparable part of the American landscape, leaving behind only the cryptic word CROATOAN, a final, misunderstood testament to their desperate choice for life.
Roanoke Island remains an archaeological site, Fort Raleigh National Historic Site. The palisade is a reconstruction, and the land holds no gold, only sand and secrets. The true story of Roanoke is not the mystery of where they went, but the quiet, enduring historical reality that they did not disappear. They simply changed. They paid the highest price for survival, becoming the first American people of mixed European and Native American descent, leaving us with a 4-century-old story of ambition, tragedy, and ultimate assimilation, the beginning of America's struggle to define itself.
If you enjoyed unsolved historical mysteries like Princes in the Tower, the story of the Roanoke colony will be even more thrilling for you. The princes vanished inside a tower, but these 114 people literally disappeared into thin air. You learned that the fate of this colony likely split into 2 different outcomes. Some may have been victims of a massacre, while others survived by sacrificing their English identity and assimilating into Native American life. Just as we looked at new evidence in Richard III's case, modern science has brought groundbreaking discoveries to Roanoke, like the 800-year drought and the X-ray map analysis. What is your take? Did the entire colony assimilate with the Croatoan tribe due to famine? Or did they meet a violent end orchestrated by Chief Powhatan? Write your preferred theory in the comments, assimilation or massacre. And please, hit like and share to help this video reach other mystery lovers like you. To follow the solutions to history's cold cases, make sure to subscribe and turn on the notification bell.